We have a huge government problem. We have a not insignificant regulatory problem, and we have too much politicization of civil service. The civil service does now have an agenda.
So it's a problem of supply complexity caused by government ideology forcing us to have the energy mix they want.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
But while pretending that it's a competitive free market.
Do we have green firms who lobby and support the green narrative because they get huge subsidies?
At the first order level, which is the subsidy, it's the same or more expensive. And then you've got to add on the cost of backup, the cost of connections, the cost of curtailment, the cost of balancing, all of which are higher for renewables than they are for conventional generation. Billions of dollars around the world have been spent on carbon capture with almost nothing to show for it. And Miliband thinks that we're going to somehow succeed where everyone else has failed. I mean, the hubris is unreal. And then there are other ways that we can look at decarbonisation, particularly in the energy sector. Nuclear is a much superior solution. The Canadian regulators actually came up with this originally, but they said if you use nuclear to meet all of your energy needs throughout your entire life, the waste produced would fit in a can of Coke.
Good morning, Kathryn. Thanks for coming in.
You're very welcome.
Very excited to talk to you. I've been enjoying your articles, learning a bit more about energy. Everything appears to be broken in our country, and energy is one of those, which we've talked about on this show quite a bit, but we haven't had anyone who has a strong answer of why we have such high energy prices, why such crippling energy prices. So it's great to talk to you.
I have some answers for that.
Well, tell us, why do we have such high energy prices? Because I operate businesses. It's one of our biggest inputs, and it's frightening what we're paying.
Okay, so we recover all of our renewable subsidies through bills. This goes back pretty much to the start of subsidies back in 1990. And the idea was that the polluter should pay. So by making energy expensive, it would discourage consumption, and it would encourage people to use green sources of energy. But that doesn't really work in practice because consumers don't have access to choice in that regard. So they have access to choice in terms of reducing consumption. If you're rich, you can buy more energy efficient appliances, you can put in better insulation and so on. If you're not rich, you probably live in rented housing, so you can't do any of that stuff. And you probably wouldn't have the money anyway. So actually it's very regressive. And nobody's really thought to change it, partly because I think of the impact on the Treasury. So we have all of these subsidy costs, and the subsidies are high. And then we also have carbon taxes on top of that. So not only do we have the emissions trading scheme, which is something Europe also has, but we added extra carbon taxes on top. We've got the climate change levy, and we've got the carbon price floor. And both of those go on to bills, fundamentally. So we have all of this nonsense. Oh, and then we have other things like the energy company obligation, which is basically suppliers having to put in insulation things to reduce people's bills. But it's really inefficient. Suppliers aren't in the building trade, and they shouldn't be in the building trade. And then there's the warm homes discount, which is straight up wealth redistribution, where suppliers take money away from one group of consumers to give it to another. And so all of this makes our bills really high. It makes the job that suppliers have to do really complicated. Ofgem has until recently allowed them very, very small margins for doing this. And so it's no wonder that they didn't do a particularly good job, because they don't really get the money they need to carry out their role.
So we have a government problem, as you said.
We have a huge government problem. We have a not insignificant regulatory problem. And we have too much politicization of civil service and quangos.
So all the problems we're seeing across government is exactly the same problems we're seeing in energy.
It is, yes.
Oh.
And I think a lot of this goes back to Gordon Brown when he gave the civil service independence from politicians, because they're just not accountable. And I think the Conservatives didn't realise this until they left office, because those rules only came in not long before they came into office in 2010. and the corruption of the civil service was a gradual process. And I don't mean corruption in the sense of, brown envelopes of cash. I mean, in terms of the ideological capture that happened. And it wasn't really until they left office that they understood the extent to which they'd been walled in by officials, that their access to information had been restricted. And you can say, well, why didn't they know this? But I think that's a little bit unfair, because it's quite draining if every single day you'd have to challenge people about, oh, is that information really true? Show me some of the sources, prove this, prove that, and the other, when their job's supposed to be to assist you. And I think it would take a fairly cynical mindset to do that as well. And I'm sure when they win the next election, they'll take a different position. But I don't really blame them for not noticing something that happened gradually over a period of time.
It's what comes up in nearly every interview we do with somebody who is connected something to do with government. The civil service is the problem.
Yeah, I think it's a huge problem. And at this point, I don't think we have any option other than to move to a more American style, which will be when an administration changes, you remove the permanent secretaries and probably the directors general and put in just completely fresh people, because the civil service does now have an agenda. And it's really interesting if you watch the testimony in the Post Office inquiry from the ministers and the officials, because you can see very clearly from that the extent to which civil servants had taken a position and then defended that position. And this is in a situation where they don't really have an obvious axe to grind. Like there was no reason that the civil service should have been so married to the idea that this Horizon system was infallible, that they should go to all this trouble to sort of manipulate ministerial involvement. So if they do that in a situation where they don't have an ideological bent, just imagine what they're doing in areas where they do.
Well, it's also strange to have a first past the post system where you do not have control of the quangos afterwards.
Yeah.
Because a first past the post system implies that you want to give power and sovereignty to Parliament, but they don't have it. I actually quite like it in the US. I've watched it with the Treasury Secretary when a new administration appoints the Treasury Secretary, and they're grilled by the Senate in terms of what they're going to do and what their qualifications are. And I don't understand why we don't have it here. Why wouldn't a Kathryn Porter be brought in as a potential head of energy? Why would you be grilled and given the opportunity to do it with all your expertise? Because I do worry that there's a lack of competence and expertise amongst the people making these decisions.
There is, and that applies to politicians as well as to civil servants.
Yeah.
And while you can be somewhat sympathetic to politicians, because finding politicians with engineering or science backgrounds is tricky, you definitely shouldn't be struggling to do that within the civil service. But if you look at, and the people who are heading these quangos, if you look at their academic background, for example, they're all like historians and studied politics or, at best economics. None of it qualifies them for the roles that they're doing. And, I keep going to events where Chris Stark's supposed to speak and he keeps dropping out. I think maybe he's realised that I'm going to try and ask him this question at some point, which is, please explain in 2 sentences how electricity is generated and the importance of inertia.
Should we set up a debate?
He'll probably go away and sort up.
I'm reading a book at the moment. I think is it Ian Dunt? I can't remember his name. The book's called How Westminster Works and Why It Doesn't. And it's frightening for 2 reasons. The pure competency through it. The way ministers are moved around in reshuffles with no experience in what they've become a minister for to then run it. The incentives for them to do some big grand project, whether it's successful or not. The opening chapter talks about the reforms to the probation service, which absolutely destroyed the probation service because a minister wanted to prove something. But it also talks about SPADs. It also talks about the civil service. And the kind of conclusion I came to was, it's like this. If I had a big company and we wanted to work on our energy policy, we would contact someone like yourself who's an expert, who has the credentials. I mean, your website gives away your credentials. We wouldn't.
They're not supposed to be a secret.
No, but that's what you want, right? In the private sector.
Yeah. completely.
Every business I have, we employ experts, or we train people to be experts. We don't employ students who've got history degrees to come and run businesses they've got no history in. Yet our 1.15 trillion government budget is run by what's the best way to put it? A bunch of incompetent clowns. And we wonder why our country's literally falling apart.
Our business secretary is a dude who was confused about whether or not he was a solicitor.
Is there any way of looking at, so when we're buying energy, for every pound we spend, where that pound goes? Do you have that as a chart? Do you have that as a data?
I don't, but lots of people have asked for it. So
Yeah.
it's not completely straightforward to work it out. But I might give it a go.
Yeah. How much is siphoned off by government, and where does it get wasted?
Well, so, I mean, siphoned off suggests it's going into the government's pocket, but that's not really true.
Okay.
A large chunk is going directly to renewable generators through the subsidies. But then there's also a large amount that's going to enable renewable generation. Because, so if I'm selling electricity generated with gas or nuclear, because it's what we call dispatchable, so it doesn't depend really on some outside factors like the weather, then, there's a high, it's pretty much what we'd call firm. If I say I'm going to sell you 100 megawatts tomorrow, then unless there's some unexpected trip, which happens, but that could happen to renewables as well, you'll get your 100 megawatts tomorrow. And there might be a bit of small variation because you do get atmospheric conditions do impact fuel efficiency, but it's at sort of at the margins. If I had a wind farm and I said I'm going to sell you 100 megawatts tomorrow, there's something like a 30% chance you'll get it, and 70% chance you won't. Because wind, the capacity, what we call the capacity factor of wind, is on average 35%, and it's 10% for solar. So that basically means that if your nameplate capacity is 100 megawatts, then on average you'll get 35 or 10 over the year. So, but what people need is firm power. They don't need something that they might get 10% or 35% of the time. They need it all the time. And so if it's not available from the wind or solar, something else has to provide it. But we don't require our renewable generators to provide firm power. We just say, do your best. Just give it when you can. And so that means consumers then have to pay the cost of everything else, the backup when it's not windy or sunny. That goes straight on our bills through the capacity market. And then the cost of connecting up all of these renewables goes on our bills. And the cost of curtailment, because the priority is just connect renewables at all costs. So you've got wind farms like Sea Green, which opened in October 23. In 2024, they were curtailed off twice as much as they generated. So in terawatt hour terms, it was curtailment was double generation. And they did this on purpose. They deliberately built and connected wind farms behind grid constraints, knowing you couldn't use the electricity for material portions of the time.
Hold on, was that a connections issue?
It's a constraint issue. So there's not enough power lines going from Scotland to England. And so that means that once the capacity on the line is full, you have to tell people to stop generating. And this particular wind farm was told to stop twice as much as it wasn't.
Is it 1.5 billion? We've looked this up a lot.
Yeah, it's about that much.
Yeah.
And that's growing. So this is and then you've got the real-time balancing. Electrical equipment is quite finicky, and it needs the system to be stable in a particular way. And that relies on supply and demand being very closely balanced in real time. So moment to moment, you basically need supply and demand to be the same. And of course, if you've got something like wind, where every gust can affect that balance, and with clouds passing over solar farms can affect that balance, that makes it harder to maintain the supply and demand balance. And that costs money then to manage. And so that is also adding billions of pounds a year. And all of this goes on to network charging. So the curtailment costs, the connections costs, the balancing costs all just appear inside network costs, along with the network costs you would have had anyway before you started adding renewables.
Right. So this isn't an
and
issue.
it's not broken out. So you can't go, oh yes, here's the network cost that's, this bit is for connections and this bit is for curtailment. So you can't find it in the bill. So I can go away and look at what is the curtailment cost across the whole industry. And then I'll have to say, so how much of that, what percentage of electricity is consumed by households versus everyone else? And then, say, okay, what's the average household consumption? And then work out, so what do I think the average annual amount of curtailment is paid by each household? So this is not straightforward calculations to make.
So it's a problem of supply complexity caused by government ideology forcing us to have the energy mix they want.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
But while pretending that it's a competitive free market.
Well,
so they say we've got a market. It's all market forces, and then they put in place all of these rules that mean it's really not. So if you look at something like wholesale market volume trading, that's just fallen through the floor. Now it never was especially liquid. A lot of trading was done bilaterally, but the volumes have collapsed. Why have they collapsed? Well, on the one hand, Ofgem forces suppliers to hedge in a very specific way for the price cap. And so if you don't do it in that specific way, you risk losing money. So they all try and do it in that way. And then on the other hand, 40% of generation in the market has basically got subsidies. And the subsidies effectively is the government providing a hedge to generators. They don't need to go in the market and hedge. They get their hedge from the government. So what's really left? So that's why liquidity's collapsed, because not that many people need to access the market anymore in the way they used to. They're either doing this very specific price structure that Ofgem's essentially telling them to do, or the government provides their hedge. And that totally destroyed liquidity.
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines the world's most responsible currency the right way. Because the future depends on it.
A number of the topics we've been covering recently, it's shifted my view on why big government is bad, not just because they're wasteful, but I think we've architected an administration that's easy to grift. So if you're a venture capital company and you're interested in property, you know you can grift councils to provide emergency housing at a much higher rate than the free market would. And we've seen this all across government. Is energy the same? Do we have green firms who lobby and support the green narrative because they get huge subsidies, Dale Vince, to support the businesses that they can build on top of this? Because
of course.
Dale Vince constantly talks about how renewable energy is the cheapest energy that we have.
It's just not true.
It's not true.
It's
They're
just
lying.
not true. Yeah, I mean, so if you get somebody like Miliband saying it, then I think it's just because he's ignorant. Like,
Okay.
He doesn't do details. But if you get someone like Dale Vince saying it, he's just lying. I mean, he knows it's not cheaper. You can see from the strike prices in the CFDs that it's not cheaper. The only round that was cheap was AR4. And what happened with AR4? The developers rebid their maximum volumes into AR6 at higher prices, and they spent years begging the government for additional tax breaks and economic enhancements because they knew they weren't going to make any money.
What's AR4 and
So
AR6?
it's allocation round. So these are the auction rounds for the subsidies, basically. So once a year, they have an auction and they basically approve projects based on giving them this subsidy. And what's shocking is that it's going up. So you keep having this narrative. They've really stopped saying it, but originally it was like, oh, we're going to have these subsidies because it's an immature technology. We've got to prime the pump, and eventually they won't need subsidies anymore. Well, we started subsidizing wind in 1990. So if you're not mature after 35 years, there's something pretty fundamentally wrong with your technology. So we had the low point in AR4, and everyone went, oh, yeah, this doesn't work. Like, we can't make these projects work. So then AR5 happened, and they had 0 bids for offshore wind, none at all. So then AR6 came along, and all the prices were higher for every technology. And that auction took place in April last year. And you had, and the other trick is they quote everything in 2012 money. So then they look cheap, but then when you inflate it up, then you see the real picture. So onshore wind and solar priced at in the low 70s per megawatt hour. It's like 70-ish per megawatt hour. And then offshore wind priced at £83 per megawatt hour in today's money. But when we got to the end of last year, if you look back at the average day-ahead price in the market, which is what's the reference for these contracts, £73 a megawatt hour. So it's effectively the same as the onshore wind and solar, but this is for firm power. You don't need any of this backup business for that because that's based on gas. So your gas generation is there all the time. It's firm, dispatchable. Yeah. So you don't have to add anything else onto it, really. Whereas with the £70 you gave to onshore wind and solar, then you've got to add on the backup costs and all the rest of it. But the offshore wind, even on the subsidy, was 13% more expensive. There's absolutely no way you can claim that it's cheaper. Because at the first order level, which is the subsidy, it's the same or more expensive. And then you've got to add on the cost of backup, the cost of connections, the cost of curtailment, the cost of balancing, all of which are higher for renewables than they are for conventional generation.
So renewables are the problem?
Yeah, definitely. We had obviously in 2022 and 2023, gas prices suddenly drove everything because gas prices went really high. Gas prices are down 86% from their 2022 highs. Well, our bills haven't gone down 86%. And if you look back, and I have a chart of this in a report I wrote recently on the true costs of net zero. And I think my chart started in the late 90s, and that went right up until now, effectively. So I've got the wholesale electricity price, the wholesale gas price, and household spend on electricity. And what you see in this chart is that from the start in 1998 or whenever I started it, up until 2021, wholesale gas and electricity prices were really stable. They just went sideways. They were low and they had low volatility. But from about 2006, the household spend started going up. It disconnected itself from wholesale prices. And so what I calculated was, well, if we looked at the period before 2006, we had a broadly stable margin of household prices over wholesale prices. And so, well, if we continued having that stable margin through until today, how much less would we have spent on our bills?
No, oh God.
£220 billion in today's money.
What? Over what period?
Since 2006.
And that's what consumers would have spent?
Yes, households.
Households. How many households in the country?
About 23 million.
23 million? Can you figure that out per household, Connor? 220 billion divided by 23 million? Divided by how many years?
Well, from 2006.
Okay, so it was a little...
19
years.
18 years.
Yeah.
It went up to...
So that's what subsidised this push for renewables?
Yeah. But it didn't all just go in the pocket of the generators because you got to pay for the connections and all that other stuff. So But yeah, I mean, that's the extra money. And the stupid thing is, and that's even after we paid the crazy money for the gas crisis.
£9.5 per household.
In
total.
per year?
No, in
Total.
total.
In total. It's about, so hundreds of pounds a year.
Yeah.
What a waste.
Yeah, totally.
Is there any...
And they say, oh, well, we'll get the benefits of cheap renewables. But they're not cheap. And we're never going to get that benefit.
And they never will be cheap.
They're never, ever are going to be cheap. And the reason, so people think, oh, yeah, well, the wind and the sun are free. So, yeah, that seems reasonable. But the machines you have to build to turn that free energy into electricity, well, they're not free at all. They cost billions of pounds. The equipment that you need to build to take that electricity and bring it to consumers, it costs billions of pounds. If I build a 800 megawatt gas power station, which is like a normal size for a biggish gas power station, I need one grid connection, like one set of wires. If I want to build an 800 megawatt wind farm, now I need 60 turbines. But that's only going to work a third of the time. So I basically need 3 times as many to give me the equivalent annual energy that I'd get from my gas power station.
But you would still also have the risk of times when there's no wind.
Oh, yes, because you'll get it all at once. But if you're doing this on an average annual basis, the equivalent energy, you'd require about 3 times the nameplate capacity to be equivalent to wind, to gas. But it's a bit less because gas isn't 100% available. But, this is the sort of back of the envelope thinking that you can do to see, does that claim that renewables are cheap stack up? Well, no, this doesn't sound cheap to me.
What is the life cycle of a wind farm versus, say, a gas plant?
I'd say the gas plant probably will last a little bit longer, but not necessarily a lot. CCGTs will go normally 25 to 30 years. Wind, we don't have so much reliable data on 30-year-old wind farms. And actually what tends to happen is that because the older wind farms were smaller turbine size, they repower them. They replace the turbines with bigger ones, before the end of their life, if you like.
Is there any role for wind and
So I would say wind, no.
None.
No
role for wind.
And I would say the reason why is that it's a really inefficient use of capital, but it's also a really inefficient use of natural resources. When you look at the materials you've got to dig out of the ground, basically, to build these things, and the amount of environmental damage that causes.
Kill a lot of birds.
Well, but even before you get to the birds thing, you've got to dig up all these materials. Now, most of it comes from open cast mining. Like copper, for example, you need 15 tons of copper per megawatt of offshore wind. One of the biggest copper producing countries in the world is Chile, but the soil in Chile is really rich in arsenic. What happens when you open a new mine? You blow up the surface of the ground, so all this arsenic-laden soil gets blown into the air, and then people breathe it.
Yeah.
It falls down in the rain onto crops, onto water sources. It poisons the fish. It contaminates the water drunk by livestock and by people. And so they have really high instances of cancer in the areas around these mines. If you look at the processing of lithium, it consumes huge amounts of water. Again, lots of this in South America. So there are actually disputes over access to water because the miners want water for the lithium processing, but people want water to drink. They want to have water to irrigate their crops, to water their livestock and so on. And so that's actually causing disputes among different groups of people about how they're going to use this water resource. And of course, it can't, once it's been used in the mining industry, then it's dirty and can't really be used for anything else. If you look in South Africa, where there's where manganese, which is another key mineral for the energy transition, they have issues with water there because the miners lower the water table to stop the mines from flooding, and this affects boreholes for hundreds of kilometers around. And scientists think it'll take them like 200 years for those to recover. And obviously that impacts water for human consumption and agriculture and livestock and so on. So there are really significant issues. And then you have social issues around things like the cobalt mining in the Congo, where you've got tens of thousands of really young children working in those mines. So there's a really big ethical question around this, and sort of social inequalities that are being exacerbated by this push for net zero. And is it really ethical for people in developed countries to be imposing this kind of hardship on developing countries just so that we can feel smug about net zero targets?
Well, it's a question for Dale Vince and his friends in Islington.
Yeah, I mean, completely. And then they go, oh yeah, but they'll be impacted by climate change. Well, yeah, that might be true. But I've not really seen any analysis to see whether we should mitigate the effects of climate change versus try and prevent them. And if you think about if climate change happens in a particular way, and some of it would happen anyway, because the climate's been changing since the Earth acquired an atmosphere. So unpicking what would happen anyway versus what wouldn't have happened is not straightforward. But then throughout human history, you've had population migrations because of environmental change. And so some of that, you can really say, well, is it reasonable to think that now has to stop because we're in the modern era? Maybe some low-lying islands shouldn't be saved and the people should be moved somewhere else. Maybe that's the reality we should be considering. And then there are other ways that we can look at decarbonisation, particularly in the energy sector. Nuclear is a much superior solution.
The greenest solution.
It's the everythingest solution. It's high energy density, so you get massive energy on a small geographic footprint. So you don't need to take up loads of agricultural land. You don't need to blight the landscape. You're not going to kill birds. You might kill some jellyfish, but you're not going to kill birds. It's the waste issue is massively overblown. The Canadian regulators actually came up with this originally, but they said if you use nuclear to meet all of your energy needs throughout your entire life, the waste produced would fit in a can of Coke.
Can of Coke. Yeah, I read this which was the book I read it in? Oh, I can't remember, but I was reading about it because it's one of the things that really bothers me when I talk to a environmental activist, someone from the Green Lobby. I always just put the nuclear question to them, and I've not found a single person say, I agree, we should have nuclear energy.
Well, I think you probably haven't spoken to the right environmentalists because I think the environmental lobby is split on nuclear. Some of them definitely see that it has a role and some of them are still against. Okay. I think that probably some of the older generations are more against, but you've got to remember that really up until the 1980s, Western governments were still putting out public service videos about what to do in the event of a nuclear war. The British government, this is actually quite hilarious, you can find these videos on YouTube, but in the post-war years, the British government decided that apparently Brits were getting a bit miserable and they needed motivating. So they hired students who'd studied film and had a particular interest in the horror genre to make public information videos. And almost all of these videos involved the gruesome deaths of young children. So one of the famously terrible, horrific ones was called Apaches, very unpolitically correct, but it was basically a take on cowboys and Indians set on a farm, and all of the children died in horrible ways, with farming accidents. And at the end of the video, they actually scrolled the names of all the children who died in farming accidents in real life in the previous year, like in the credits. There was like all of these children's names. And they had one which was like the most horrific, actually. And I don't remember what it was called, but it was effectively some rural village was having its summer fete. And the highlight of the summer fete was the adults organising the children to have races across train tracks with the obvious consequences. So the film ends with all of these corpses of children covered in like blankets, sort of laid out, like dozens of them next to the railway line. And this was all supposed to be like, don't play on the railway line, kids, So this was like really horrific. And as part of this series, they had one about what to do in the event of a nuclear a nuclear war. And, this included instructions on how to dispose of family members who died. So it was like, they were like, secure a room in your house, put protection, thick curtains, tables with blankets on that you can sort of live under. But, if somebody were to die, you need to remove them from the room that you're living in. So please try and wrap them up in paper and plastic. Remember to put a name tag on them with their name and address, and then just move them to another part of your house so that they can just kind of, decompose where you're not.
I know what we're going to be watching tonight, Con.
Yeah, you'll find all this stuff on YouTube. So my point is that there's a generation of people who grew up with this, and I think who had the fear about nuclear, because it wasn't really clear the difference between civil and military nuclear. And people think, oh, yes, we had Chernobyl, but only about 30 people died at Chernobyl.
And that was
20,000 people died at Bhopal, and we didn't freak out about pesticides. Nobody died.
Bhopal?
It was a chemical factory in India. And over the course of like an hour or something, they had a leak, and tens of thousands of people died.
Wow.
It's the biggest industrial accident in history. But the fact is you don't even know about it.
No, I don't even know
But
about
if I said 3 Mile Island.
I know 3 Mile Island. I know Fukushima. One died in Fukushima?
Nobody.
Oh, I thought one died.
No. 2 people, I think, died because stuff fell on them in the tsunami.
Oh, no, I thought they sent somebody in.
No. Well, no, I mean, they did, but they didn't die.
And are they okay now?
I assume so. So the plant manager died of cancer, but he died of lung cancer, and he was a heavy smoker. So you can't really attribute that to the, to the incident.
So in the history of nuclear, we've had 30 people die.
Yeah, if you look at nuclear deaths per unit of generation across the whole of the life cycle,
it's going to be the safest energy, isn't it?
together with solar, yeah, and it's so low that it's essentially in the statistical error margin. So the highest ones are things like coal, because of all the deaths in mining, basically anything to do with large scale extraction. I mean, obviously you've got uranium mining, but you need so little uranium to run nuclear power stations that the deaths are then tiny compared with the amount of energy produced. And then wind has quite a lot of deaths because you just get people falling from height.
I've seen that famous photo of the 2 people on top of a wind turbine when it's on fire.
Oh, right. Okay.
Have you never seen the photo?
That one, no.
Kind of find that photo. I mean, it's really beautiful. But yeah, so there's no argument then for wind at all anywhere.
No, I just don't. I think that when you look at what you need to do to make it, both in terms of money, you could spend the money better elsewhere, more efficiently elsewhere, and the environmental impact of getting all the materials, because you need so many materials. This is the thing, if the thing only works a third of the time, you're going to have to get so much more
stuff. And it blights the countryside.
Well, but even if you're willing to put up with the blight, the real blight is actually happening in the mining countries.
Well, but there is also, I read about depression linked to the low hum of the, there's like a low hum from the turbines when people live in the region, and that can cause depression as well. Okay,
well, that's going to be interesting then in Matt Miliband's new sort of God and Wind utopia.
You got to bring out that photo. I mean, if you've not seen it, it's just worth seeing. And also, Con, if you can find, because I just want you to see this. There you go, look. That's a real photo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They look like they're getting intimate there at the top of the wind turbine.
Well, they haven't got long left. So, but find the stats, Connor, on birds killed by wind turbines, because it blew my mind. I think you find all the animals. So is there an argument, but there is an argument for solar?
I'd say there's a limited argument for solar.
Okay.
Definitely not on agricultural land.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a tricky one in Britain because the UK is the second worst country in the world for solar after Ireland. And this is according to the World Bank. So, it has a 10% capacity factor, according to the UK government. So again, this is a really pretty inefficient thing to do.
There you go. 10,000 to 100,000 birds are killed by turbine blade strikes annually in the UK. I mean, that's a broad range. Approximately 55 million birds are killed in the UK each year by cats. Okay.
Yeah, not my cats. My cats are useless at catching birds. They're very good with rodents, but birds, yeah, very low success rate, thankfully.
We've got a large solar farm being constructed where we live in Bedford, and but the land is being sold by the local council for this. So local councils are being offered and they're all strapped for cash, being offered a lot of money. I don't know whether it's central government or private companies grifting central government.
Well, I mean, you look at, it's quite an interesting one because I'd be willing to bet that council also has an anti-slavery policy.
Okay.
And guess where the solar panels will be coming from?
I assume China.
Yeah.
Is it, and specifically the Uyghur region?
Yeah, so 60% of the world's polysilicon comes from Xinjiang. But then you've got all the rest of it as well. So, yeah, I mean, the entire Chinese solar supply chain is, and batteries as well.
And the anti-slavery policy, is that meant to cover the entire supply chain?
It is.
Great. Typical.
Yeah. I mean, I think some community groups have successfully challenged solar projects on this basis. Because you can get, if your local authority has an anti-slavery policy and then they're approving solar farms using panels made in China, then you can say, well, that decision is inconsistent with your stated anti-slavery policy.
Yeah.
And so then, that would be something that they would potentially lose a judicial review on.
Interesting. Scroll that down a second. Britain's state-owned energy company will not be allowed to use solar panels.
Yeah, there was an amendment into the...
Interesting. And
so originally, Lord Alton of Liverpool proposed this amendment, and it was passed in the House of Lords. It came to the Commons. Labour MPs were whipped to vote it down, which they did. Lord Alton immediately resubmitted his amendment, but then it started to get a bit controversial, and backbenchers started to get a bit nervous and antsy about it. So then Miliband decided he was going to table his own amendment that basically said exactly the same as the Alton amendments, but then he could claim it was all his idea. And Lord Alton said, well, okay, well, I'll happily withdraw mine. So then that it passed in the Commons, and then it didn't need to go back to the Lords because they were, they'd already passed it once.
So where would we use solar? On houses? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So houses, if you've got enough money to put down the capital cost and you don't mind waiting a few years to get the payback, so it's more of a sort of affluent person play.
Okay.
And then putting it on like factory roofs and things like that, it can save money. But the interesting thing there is I've done a few of these projects, and the clients start out by saying, yeah, we want to meet our average annual demand using solar. And then we know we'll have a surplus in the summer, and we know we'll have to buy more power from the grid in the winter. But we want to be net zero. So let's do this. And we know we can't be net zero on a sort of pay-as-you-go basis, but we'll try and sort of average this out over the year. And then I say to them, yeah, okay, just keep in mind that the surplus that you sell back in the summer will be worth almost nothing, but the energy you're buying from the grid in the winter will be quite expensive. So the costs aren't going to offset each other. And actually, in the summer, you do sometimes get negative pricing. So you'll potentially have to pay to get rid of the spare solar. Not one of these people has ever sized their project in that way when they actually looked at the numbers. They all just size to their peak summer demand. And so they say, okay, we'll never have a surplus. Or we'll never aim to have a surplus. Maybe, so peak summer demand and that's it. So.
It's very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
So should our energy mix just be nuclear, gas, biomass?
Oh God, not biomass.
Not even biomass? No, okay. So it
No,
should just be nuclear and
biomass
gas.
is a massive con.
Okay, tell me.
Okay,
Because that's a large part of our mix, right? It's significant.
5-ish%.
Oh,
What
5%,
happens
okay.
is, so Drax used to be a coal power station, and everyone's like, "Oh, coal, who don't like that?" So they got subsidies to switch to biomass. So what they do is they cut down trees in the US. They then have to turn that into pellets, which requires energy. They've got to dry it to remove the moisture, which requires energy. Then they load it up onto ships, which use bunker fuel, like the dirtiest part of the crack, ship it over to Yorkshire and set fire to it. And when they set fire to it, it emits more carbon dioxide than burning coal does.
So it's the worst.
So it's worse than burning coal. And of course, people say, well, yeah, you got to ship the coal as well, but coal has way higher calorific value, so you don't need anywhere near as many ships. The volume of coal you burn is far, far smaller than the volume of wood you've got to burn. And you don't need to sort of dry and pelletize the coal. So, the life cycle emissions of the wood pellet biomass are significantly higher than for coal. And then they go, oh, yes, but it's zero carbon because they plant more trees. I'm like, yeah, they could have planted trees anyway. I mean, it's like there's not laws against planting. It's not like, oh, you're a coal power station, you're not allowed to plant trees. Oh, you can't do that. Anybody can plant trees. So this is just complete nonsense.
God, could you bring that back up? Sorry, just a sec. So let's strip out the biomass. We'll keep the nuclear.
So the biomass should be included in fossil fuels because it's effectively the same thing.
Okay, hydroelectric, we have only 1%.
Yeah, we don't. Well, I mean, that's what's running now, isn't it?
This is today's. Yeah.
Rather than what's connected.
So
Every time I look at this chart, we're not producing enough energy to actually supply ourselves.
No, that's because we rely on interconnectors. We basically outsourced our electricity generation to other countries. Quite literally in some cases.
And they're upping the price,
The one
obviously.
with the Netherlands, well, no, they're not. That's not how the market works. But the one in the Netherlands, we were going to build a power station in England, and then it was built in the Netherlands instead at the other end of the interconnector.
Because they could do it cheaper, more efficiently?
We just preferred it that way. I don't know that they could do it cheaper, but that's how it happened.
That's not a terrible scenario to be importing some energy?
Importing a bit, maybe, but we're relying on it. Now, you've got Norway. They've got parliamentary elections in September. Almost all of the parties there are now hostile to interconnection. Some of them actually want to tear up the deal that they have with us. And they could do it. I mean, they've got so much money in the Sovereign Wealth Fund. They could just go, here, have some billions, whatever. We don't want to sell you electricity anymore.
Hold on. The minus figure for Ireland, does that mean we're...
Ireland is basically demand on the GB grid. We always supply both gas and electricity to Ireland.
So we're at the point now where we're at 37... 40.
But that's just today. Then, you look at it tomorrow and wind could be like... Because that's got 12.9 gigawatts of wind, I think it said. A few days ago, it was at like 1 gigawatt.
And so how do we feel that demand is just we importing from?
Well, we ramp up the gas.
Oh, we ramp up the gas. Okay. Oh, shit. But the gas is cheaper than the wind.
Well, no. So the way this is priced, this is based on your short-run marginal cost. So this is why everybody obsesses about this. They go, oh yeah, the short-run marginal cost. So the short-run marginal cost of wind is like pretty much zero. But that's not really relevant because consumers don't pay the short-run marginal cost. They pay the retail price. And that's then adjusted for all the other stuff, the subsidies and all the rest of it. So this doesn't take account of the subsidies. The only thing this takes account of is that the gas price includes carbon taxes as well.
For the wind, are the subsidies do they exist both in the construction of the wind plants and in the ongoing?
No, they start to receive the money once the thing starts producing.
Right. But if you were to put in charge, we get a new government tomorrow and they phone up Kathryn, come and fix our energy mix. you wouldn't immediately switch off wind and solar, would you?
No, but I would try to get rid of the subsidies. So
Okay.
I'd absolutely ban any more subsidies. There would be no new subsidies.
So they'd have to close down.
would. Well, they wouldn't be built. This is new subsidies.
Yeah.
I would do what I could to restructure old ones. I think there's some easy wins there. Some of the old projects on renewables obligation, which was the predecessor to the contracts for difference, they were getting more than one certificate per megawatt hour, which is, I think you could argue that's a windfall gain. And the courts typically don't allow you to object to the loss of a windfall gain because they say you don't really have an entitlement to it. You should just be thankful you had it up until now and don't cry when it's taken away. So I think there's potential there. I also think that anyone, Conservatives or Reform, should both actually say that they would repudiate any new renewables contracts that are not value for money from this point forward, because I think, again, it would be difficult for a developer to then argue that the contract was being broken if they'd known that that would happen.
We might bankrupt Dale Vince if we do that.
Side benefits.
So we had an economist.
So I don't think you can repudiate existing contracts.
Yes,
because you don't want to be destroying investor confidence.
Yeah.
in the market or in the way the government conducts itself. But if you're an opposition party and you say, if we win the election, we will look at these in the context of value for money when we come into office, any new ones from this point forward, then if they come in and they try and cancel them, it would be pretty difficult, I think, for those developers to argue that they didn't know this was at least, a risk. And given where Labour is in the polls, I'd say that would be quite a high risk. So the whole point would be actually to deter them from bidding in the auctions in the first place, because you'd want the next government to come in with the least bad situation. And Miliband keeps trying to put poison pills in these deals to make developers whole against any future changes by future governments. So you really need to say, before it all starts, we're just not going to live with it. We're going to tear them up.
We've had a couple of economists in here, and we've discussed Rachel Reeves' budget and growth plans, and they always universally dismiss them as stupid
fantasies.
Yeah, fantasies. And I always ask, well, how would you drive growth? And they always come back and say it's quite easy. We have to get more people into work. We have to reduce the size of the welfare state. We have to deregulate. We have to drive investor confidence, because if we drive investor confidence, more money. Like just a series of steps where they say
slash taxes.
Yeah. Obviously, Liz Truss tried some of this and got called out. But
I thought Liz Truss's budget was one of the best budgets I'd heard in ages. I mean, when I actually
we're a big fan
heard
of
that,
she's been in here.
When I heard that budget statement, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I mean, there were obviously a couple of bits that I didn't agree with, but overall I was like, this is the best budget I think I've ever heard. But she made two mistakes, I think. One was that she didn't communicate and it took everyone by surprise. And the other one, she bottled it way too quickly. The markets always overreact to everything. They are like sheep. And everyone knows you only have to look at sheep sideways and they die. They're so neurotic. So if she'd held her nerve for a few more days, and I reckon she could have ridden it out, the markets would have just calmed down. But no, she just bottled it.
We had Lord Monckton in here last week, and he said, if I was her advisor, I would have said, just be patient.
Yeah.
Just wait it out.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of hers. I mean, she wants small government. I think it's a great idea. But her budget would have given me the confidence to invest.
Yes.
And
it's what you have to do. You have to... So deregulation, we need to move back to principles-based regulation.
Okay.
And that gives you a couple of huge benefits. One is that you move away from these rule books. It's a huge cottage industry, basically, that regulators have to come up with these detailed rules. Then they have to hire loads and loads of people to monitor whether there's compliance with the rules and enforce when there isn't compliance. And then you've got the regulated firms have to hire loads of people to make sure that, to understand the rules and try and ensure internal compliance. And then you get all these training companies offering training to help people understand the rules. And then you've got people trying to game the rules and all the rest of it. it's
Get rid
just
of the rules.
nonsense. Get rid of the rules. Go back to principles-based regulation. And so I'm a big fan, actually, of the FCA principles. I don't think the FCA applies them correctly or uses them correctly, but the principles themselves are solid. Behave with integrity, behave with due skill, care and diligence, treat customers fairly, cooperate with the regulator. All of there's 12 of them. They're really good. We should have them in the energy markets. And you could say, Ofgem could say, right, we're bringing these principles into the energy market and, treating customers fairly. We will consider that if you offer existing customers a disadvantageous tariff relative to new customers, that we'll consider that not treating customers fairly. So then you don't need loads of rules about it. You've just said, our guidance is that's an example of not treating customers fairly.
Do we need Ofgem?
Well, that's an excellent question. I would actually move retail energy regulation to the FCA.
Okay.
Because it's got more in common with retail banking than it does with other areas of the energy market. Suppliers essentially just move money around.
Yeah.
And they handle customer deposits in a way that's not that different to the way banks handle deposits. I mean, they don't use it to lend out, but the actual handling of the deposit is pretty similar. So yes, I would just move that to the FCA. I think you do probably need some sort of regulation of monopoly utilities, but I'm not really persuaded that the price control model is the right one. If you look at what's happened in the water sector, now this hasn't happened in the energy sector, but what happened in the water sector was Ofwat came along and he goes, okay, well, we'll have the price control. You'll have every 5 years. You'll have a business plan. We'll sign it off. You'll get effectively then a guaranteed income for those 5 years. And, based on normal sort of capital market theory, we'll tell you that the cost of debt is cheaper than the cost of equity. And then what you should expect with utilities like water companies is that because they're effectively many years of stable cash flows is what you should expect. And so that really suits certain types of investors, particularly pension funds. They want actually steady income over many years because that fits their liabilities. So you should be trying to create a structure where you match off the sort of risks and benefits there. You've got that synergy. But because of the way they set up the price control, you got people like Macquarie who thought, well, a stable long-term income in an environment where the cost of debt is cheaper than the cost of equity, that's got securitization written all over it. So, and they just didn't just securitize a bit, they did a whole business securitization. So they basically borrowed against the cash flows in the price control, all of it, and then paid it out as dividends. And Ofwat, when it was doing, so the other part of the price control is the regulated firms get allowances for investment. So they'll say, here's our business plan. We want to spend X amount of money on this new reservoir or this new sewer or replacing these drains or whatever it is. And they get an allowance for that. Ofwat was signing off business plans that didn't meet the threshold of what you'd need to maintain the asset base in a proper way. But it was just thinking, we're saving money for consumers. But, they didn't go, oh no, this is like a really bad thing. It's going to cause trouble down the line. And maybe we shouldn't let them remove all this capital from these companies because that's the capital that really should be used to invest in the asset base. Now, if you didn't have the price control, then you would have had your pension funds investing in the water companies, and they wouldn't have allowed that because their interest is in long-term stable cash flow. So they need the asset base to be managed in a way that will permit those long-term stable cash flows. They don't want to sweat the assets. They don't want to underinvest. They probably don't want to overinvest. They might not get it perfectly right, but it's not in their best interests to just give themselves a chunk of cash at the beginning and let the assets all crumble and die, because that's not what their liabilities look like. And so the whole regulatory system and the fact that Ofwat was too naive, lacked financial sophistication to understand the financial engineering that was going on and the consequences of it, meant that we've arrived in this complete catastrophe that we have now in the water sector. Now, what's happened in energy is not as extreme as that, but it shares some of the same features. We haven't had the securitization aspect, but we've definitely had the underinvestment. You just have to look at the report this week into the North Hyde substation fire, and we can see that that National Grid has had a really poor culture around maintenance and around remediation.
This was Heathrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm quite critical of Heathrow as well, but that's a separate topic. So then you look at the price controls that Ofgem has done. And in the price control that we're in at the moment that's coming to an end, they actually cut the legacy CapEx budget, the legacy CapEx allowance that National Grid requested. They cut it by a third. And the CapEx allowance actually for connections related stuff, though that was all signed off. Oh yeah, you can have that money, but oh no, we're not comfortable with your justifications for the legacy stuff. And basically it's the same story for the new price control that's just out for consultation at the moment. The draft determination, again, very weighted towards the connection side. And so Ofgem got upset with me because I'd suggested that their focus on renewables connections was distorting the behaviour of regulated firms. And they said, well, we've never told them to prioritise connections over maintaining legacy assets. But I think that's kind of naive. I don't think they need to tell them. The fact that they are devoting so many resources within Ofgem to the whole question of connections is well known. And it's a much higher priority than asset management. And so then it makes sense that the regulated firms will reflect that in their business plans. They don't need to be told explicitly. They can see what's going on the ground. And they're not getting the money that they ask for that work on the legacy asset base. Now, maybe it's because they haven't put in the correct amount of effort in justifying the work. Maybe it's because Ofgem is just biased against it. Whatever the outcome is, there's been underinvestment. And, there was a huge spike of grid investment in the 1970s. A third of our transformers were built in the 70s, 30% of our switchgear and half of our power lines. Now, they obviously age at different rates, but Ofgem they don't have people sitting there going, when we had that big investment spike in the 1970s and all those assets are aging at roughly the same time, what might that mean? And then you've got this other thing where actually renewables can have an adverse impact on grid hardware. If you look at solar and transformers, because the solar ramp is very sudden, at sunrise and sunset, your generation comes on and comes off really quickly. And that, to the transmission system, that just looks like changes in demand. So at sunset, you suddenly get loads of extra demand on the system. And when you get these potential changes of direction, even going through the transformer, 1 minute that might be supplying, the other minute that might be consuming, and that change is happening really quickly. And particularly when the ambient temperature can be high still in the summer at sunset, it doesn't suddenly become cold. That actually puts thermal stresses on these assets. And there's not really a very good evidence base around that. If your transformer is above X amount of years old, what's the impact of this solar behavior? Once you connect more than X amount of solar to any particular transformer or substation, does that, is there a tipping point at which that suddenly becomes a problem? I'm not seeing the analysis around that. If I were Ofgem, in fact, if I were any regulator, I would have a team whose sole job it is to think, how can our market break? What are the ways in which our market might break? Not just, cyber attacks and terrorism or whatever, but just really mundane stuff like that could have been overlooked. They've started replacing, like oil-filled cables with polyethylene versions. Well, what if they age in a different way from what was expected? You've seen in the French nuclear fleet, they've had systemic problems. They had stress corrosion in the P4 and N4 reactors that the regulator made them take them all out of service to test them and do remedial works. And this was specific to those reactor classes, and it was an age-related issue.
Right.
So this is not by any means far-fetched. Electricity assets suffer from age-related issues that can be applied across a whole class of assets. So you need to sit and think, what if that type of issue manifests in these types of assets that were built at this particular time? And it was systemic faults because this stuff's all over the network now. What if, National NESO is balancing the grid using software that was written in the 1980s, literally a relic of privatization. What if it breaks? So not just what if it's hacked, but what if it breaks? And then, what if Octopus is actually bankrupt because its auditors have failed to spot accounting irregularities or fraud within the company? I'm not suggesting for a minute that that's true of Octopus. I'm just choosing an example of a big company. We've seen spectacular audit failures where auditors have signed off accounts and then the company's gone massively bankrupt because their finance director was stealing millions of pounds or whatever. This has happened. It's not far-fetched. Where are the people in Ofgem sitting there thinking, what if? What if these things happened? What if people in Ofgem are corrupt and getting backhanders from regulated firms? So you really need regulators to think in these terms. If you're really properly managing risk, you need to be forward-looking, not just scanning the horizon in terms of how market change might impact your regulated landscape, but looking inwards to see what is it that within our market, the way it is now, that could cause the wheels to fall off.
Feels like a lot.
And how could it be prevented? Well, yeah, it could be. These things are all probably like low likelihood, although the 1980s software thing, I think, is getting to be higher likelihood. But certainly things like replacement risk on the transformers, well, that's not really low likelihood. There's only so much you can extend the lives of these assets. And, you should be really proactive, I think, in making sure that you're looking after your legacy asset base.
So on this podcast, you are definitely hearing me talk about Bitcoin a lot. Well, why? We live in a really strange time with governments driving inflation with their reckless spending and endless money printing. There is a way out of this. There is a way to protect your money, and that is by stacking Bitcoin. I've made loads of shows about Bitcoin. You can go and research this, you can go and read the books, but the truth is, it is the hardest money ever created. If you are interested in protecting your financial future, it's time for you to get on the Bitcoin train. I've been stacking Bitcoin personally and through my businesses since 2017. It's protected me, it's secured my family's future, and it also strengthens all of my businesses. So if you want to start stacking Bitcoin, where do you do it? Well, for me, it's with Gemini. They're a fully licensed, full reserve exchange and custodian, so they give you a secure way for you to buy and own your Bitcoin. There's no risks and no funny business. So if you're serious about stacking Bitcoin the right way, head over to Gemini.com, which is GEMINI.com. When I was talking about the economists coming in and them having easy solutions, if I was to put it to you, Kathryn, and say, okay, well, energy prices are way too high in our country. Is there fast and easy ways to bring our energy prices down? What would you do?
Oh, well, first of all, recover.
Is it easy, though? Is it relatively trivial?
Okay, well, you can recover all of your subsidies through taxation rather than from bills. That's a much fairer way to do it. Abolish all the additional...
Taxing the companies?
No, just taxing general taxation.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So it would go, like income tax would have to increase, or VAT or something.
So we'd have to increase our taxes to reduce our energy prices?
Yes.
We're just moving a problem there, though.
Well, we are, but we're reducing bills, and it's just a fairer way of recovering those costs. You could apply zero VAT. That's completely possible. Mm-hmm. You obviously would stop new subsidies. You would get rid of the energy company obligation and the warm home discount, because if you want schemes like that, there are just better people to do it.
I mean, so I read your interpretation of that, which was it's just socialism.
Yeah,
it's income redistribution
completely, and it shouldn't be the job of suppliers. So I would strip everything back, and supply should just be about the cost of supply. So it should be the cost of procuring energy in the wholesale market, the cost of delivering that energy to consumers, and the overheads that the suppliers require to do that.
Okay. And would this require a period of time where we start transitioning back to nuclear?
Right. So then I would, at the same time, I would sign a deal with KEPCO to build 5 or 6 APR 1400s, and I would pass a law that specified this reactor at these sites and just bypass all of the regulatory process.
So what's the quoted time for a nuclear reactor, and what would it be without all the unnecessary regulation?
We think that it's going to, in the end, cost £35 billion to build Hinkley Point C.
Okay.
And that will probably take, well, they started at, 2017? And we might get it in 2032. So 15, 16 years. Yeah. KEPCO is built 8 of these APR 1400s, 4 in South Korea and 4 in UAE. On average, they took 8.5 years to build, and the average cost was $5 to $6 billion US. So a tiny fraction.
Are these small modular reactors?
No, they're 1,400 megawatts each.
Okay, so,
yeah.
And so, but the other thing is that 35 billion for Hinkley, we could get 6 of those for the 220
Correct.
billion we've wasted.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So why is Hinkley so expensive? Well, first of all, it wasn't a great technology. The European pressurized water reactor got approved by the French before the design was finalized. All of their 3 projects to date have been extremely problematic. Olkiluoto finally opened about a year ago. Flamanville opened a few months ago, but keeps closing because it keeps breaking. And Hinkley's also had lots of trouble. Now, the designs eventually that were signed off in France and Finland were safe. But the UK regulators required 6,000 design changes. And the one that really imposed the biggest cost was that they insisted on an analog backup control system in case the computers broke. But the question is, like, under what circumstances would the computers break? Because they're already like air gapped. They've all got like the normal security that you'd expect, and they have backup power. So, like, what would lead them to not be available? Like, neither the French nor Finnish regulators saw any need for this analog backup. But the redesign of the control room, the extra cabling, the extra, just finding the space for everything, added a massive amount of cost. Now, let's look at Sizewell C. Sizewell C is an identical design to Hinkley. So the Office for Nuclear Regulation said, yeah, we'll basically give you a free pass to build the exact same thing. But the environmental regulators aren't given a free pass. This is an identical reactor to Hinkley on a site that's very nearly identical to Sizewell B and Sizewell A, right next door. You can spit from one to the next.
I don't understand.
There were 40,000 pages of environmental statements required as part of the permitting process. How on earth do you get 40,000 pages? Like, it should be 2 pages saying what's the difference between Sizewell B and Sizewell C.
I assume there's somebody making money on those pages.
Well, so, yeah, lawyers and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Why is this happening? Well, part of it is that we've deprioritized nuclear for such a long time that the regulators have just been allowed to get out of control, basically. And they do all this make work. And then the other one is judicial review. They're so terrified of judicial review that they basically snow everybody with paperwork in the hope that then few people will be able to afford the legal fees necessary to go through all the paperwork in order to apply for a judicial review. This is nonsense. The government should just pass a law that says we're going to identify these projects of strategic national importance. There should be maybe 5 or 6 of these, nuclear being one. And then they pass a law saying that when it comes to projects of strategic national importance, the scope for judicial review and the number of people that have standing to make an application is greatly reduced.
And in 8 years, we could have 6 of these plants.
Yeah.
This may be a silly question. Why are they building these on the coastline?
Oh, because they want water for cooling.
We don't have. We're not on a fault line like Fukushima.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't need to worry about tsunamis.
No, I was just genuinely curious.
because the Fukushima, the one in Japan, was on a fault line. So we could, in 8 years, for a cost of, you say about £6 billion each?
Yeah, it's dollars.
Okay, so less than £30 billion.
Yeah.
How much are we spending on
I would
carbon
do
capture?
this, and I would like 22. Well, that'll be 30 as well. 22 plus 8. I would actually pay for the first 2 with public money. I'd go into the bond markets. I'd borrow £12 billion, and I would write a check to KEPCO and say, right, you build me these 2 reactors. I'd put one at Sizewell C, one at Wilver to start with, and then I'd refinance that debt when construction is completed, because the markets have lost confidence in us because of the regulatory landscape. But it's really about construction risk. Once it's built, these things are extremely profitable to run. Investors will be biting your arm off to get in on that. And also because the government can still borrow more cheaply than most other people, this would be a profitable trade. And I reckon the markets would go for this. I think they would go for it irrespective of the rest of the public debt burden, because they'd see a clear repayment path, and it would be like war gilts or whatever.
I'm in. But for 30 billion, we could have 6 of these. What percent of our capacity would that supply?
Pretty much all of our summer demand.
Wow.
So currently, peak demand during the week is about 33 gigawatts. Now that's after your solar is obviously discounted from that. So our peak summer demand, including what we use for solar, is probably more like 45, 47 gigawatts. But it's a huge chunk.
But instead, we're going to spend this on
carbon capture. Yeah, I mean, billions of dollars around the world have been spent on carbon capture with almost nothing to show for it. And Miliband thinks that we're going to somehow succeed where everyone else has failed. I mean, the hubris is unreal.
Are we? Is it so? Based on what you've said here, is there any public chatter about doing this?
So I think the Conservatives quite like the idea.
Okay.
But then Sunak called the election out of the blue, and so it didn't go anywhere. But they signed a memorandum of understanding with the Korean government on nuclear for November before the election, and yeah, I mean they were kind of into the idea. And this reactor, it's not been certified in the UK, but it has been certified by the US and also in Europe. And honestly, if it's good enough for the US, it's got to be good enough for us. They have far more issues to worry about. They've got hurricanes, they've got earthquakes, they've got tornadoes, they've got, we don't have that stuff. So if they think it's fine, then it's fine. And we should not waste our time. We should just go, yeah, the US, they're not, cowboys who don't care about safety. They're a sensible nuclear regulator. In fact, they've been way too conservative as well. They've already approved it. We don't need to spend 20 years getting new approvals or whatever. We should just, so that would pass a law and say, this is approved.
And if you went to KEPCO and ordered 6, they would have the capacity to do this?
Well, that's a different question. But I would want them to bring their workforce as well. But the deal would include them trying to train a local workforce. But I don't think we have enough qualified people in the UK left to do this type of work. So we can't allow that to hold us up. So we'd need them to come and bring their people.
Yeah, but we could train people.
Yes, and that should be part of the deal. Yeah. It should be that they bring their people, but they're going to train us at the same time.
And sorry, you're saying in South Korea they've built how many?
They've done 4 in South Korea and 4 in UAE. And they've just started a new one in South Korea.
And all of these were built in 6 years?
No, about 8.5.
Oh, sorry, about 8.5 years for about 6 billion each.
Yes.
I mean, it just seems logical.
It does. So do what works.
Do any of the parties bring you in and discuss these items?
Yeah. So I talk quite a lot with the Conservatives.
Okay.
Talk a little bit with Reform. I had a member of the Scottish Parliament reached out to me recently to chat. He's quite keen to connect me with people within the SNP. I'm sort of politically agnostic on this. I want it to be right.
Yeah.
So I will talk to anybody who will listen. Because it's, what we're doing at the moment is just insane. But Miliband won't, Labour doesn't engage and neither do the Lib Dems.
But even if you believe in the net zero nonsense, this is a positive technology for net zero.
Correct.
Probably the most positive.
Yeah. far better than like this onshore wind rubbish they've come out with today.
Fusion. How realistic and how far?
No,
away or never?
Decades away. Well, they might get there. The European technology is the plasma-based technology. So effectively, they fire isotopes of hydrogen at each other, and to do this and create the reaction, you have to have the fuel has to be in the form of a plasma. This is superheated gas, effectively. There are no containers that you can put this in. So it's contained.
And they use magnets.
They do. They use a tokamak, which is like a donut-shaped magnetic structure. So obviously then the walls are metal, but because of the magnetic fields, the plasma doesn't touch the metal. So the maintenance of this magnetic field requires a lot of energy. So they need to get 10 times bigger heat gains from the nuclear reactions than they've gained so far, just to offset the plasma containment.
Right.
So right now, the fusion reactions consume energy significantly.
I thought I'd read about a test. They'd had the first test where they had produced more energy than it required.
Yeah, but that was not including the plasma containment. Because I asked them about that.
Right.
And I said, does that take account of the plasma containment? And they, no, this is just a heat gain.
Okay.
Right. So that's the heat they put in versus the heat they get out. And great. So now they get more heat out than they put in, but it's still less than the energy used for the plasma containment. So they need 10 times higher heat gains to offset the plasma containment. They're probably going to need something like 100 times to get something that's commercially viable.
Okay.
This is a long way away. And also the reactions aren't sustained at the moment. So you can't power a country on a nuclear reaction that is over in sort of seconds or less.
Is it just an engineering challenge though? On a long enough timescale, will it be solved, or is there severe blocks where it just may never be something?
I'm not sure, actually. I mean, I'd like to think it could be solved, and I certainly don't object to modest amounts of development funding being put in by the government. Modest amounts. Tens of millions, not more. But it's just not something that should be factored into any sort of system planning.
Okay. Well, I mean, these all... I knew I was going to ask you the question about how you would solve it. Because energy prices are a huge issue. And net zero is, to me, a scam. But the fact that you've come in and said it can be done for essentially 30 billion within 8 years, to me seems like this is just an obvious, like a really obvious thing we should be doing.
So that doesn't give us net zero.
No, but I'm saying I'm forgetting net zero. Net zero is a scam to me. I just forget about it. But what I'm saying is you have the best technology for working towards net zero that can be achieved in 8.5 years at a cost of 30 billion that will drastically bring down our energy prices. And there's a fairly easy capital market to access to do this.
Yeah. And it's what I would do. I mean, I would probably think, maybe the 8.5 years is, ambitious. Let's say 10 years, maybe even 12. But it's far better than anything else because it gives you high density, highly secure energy. No worrying about the weather. No need to build loads of new grid infrastructure. No need to worry about lots of different balancing stuff. It's perfect. And people say, oh, you can only run nuclear in baseload. Not true. The French wouldn't be able to balance their grid if nuclear couldn't flex.
They have, 40-50 nuclear reactors in France?
78% of their generation mix, and then 15% is hydro.
Huh. And are other parts of Europe considered? I know Germany turned off all their...
Yeah, but they're thinking of restarting
this. Okay.
Yeah. So Sweden is looking at new nuclear. Finland's obviously just built Olkiluoto. Denmark has effectively lifted its nuclear moratorium, which is like huge for them because they actually put it in law that you couldn't even look at nuclear for planning purposes, but now they're looking at nuclear. So they've essentially lifted that moratorium. Eastern European countries, Czech Republic, Poland, they're doing deals basically. Czech Republic did a deal with KEPCO. EDF took some legal action against it, but was knocked back.
So it's like a sweeping tidal change.
Yeah, and then in the US it's huge, because they need it for the hyperscalers. So the tech companies have been going around trying to sign up power purchase agreements with existing nuclear, and sometimes the local authorities are getting a bit nervous about that because it's obviously taking generation away from everyone else. But they're putting money into small modular reactors. Like nowhere in the West has small modular reactors yet. They've just started building some in Canada. GE Hitachi is the small boiling water reactor technology, and they've literally just in the last month or so started construction. But there's nothing else being built in the West that's small modular reactors.
And do those small modular reactors make sense themselves, maybe for companies, for speed?
Okay, so I think there's possibly a role for them. I mean, definitely you could do something like at Hartlepool, they've not got space there for a new gigawatt scale reactor. So once the AGR that's there closes, then you could reuse the grid connection there using some small modular reactors instead. That would be an efficient thing to do. However, we're probably 10 years away from having a viable solution in Britain. People think, oh, well, Rolls-Royce has them in submarines, but it's you can't use that. They use a highly enriched fuel. It's just not licensed for civil use anywhere in the world because of proliferation concerns. And what you need from a civil reactor is just not the same as what you need for military propulsion. So they've got to come up with a completely different design. And it's got to get certified and blah, blah, blah. So it's just not ready. And then there's another aspect of the safety case, which I think has been just not looked at really. And that's, they think one of the big benefits of small modular reactors is you can co-locate them with industry. But industry can be dangerous. So if you're combining a nuclear risk with an already dangerous industrial risk, you're potentially creating attractive targets for bad actors.
Of course, yeah.
Now, if I wanted to drive a tanker of dangerous chemicals to one of our existing nuclear sites, I would find that very difficult. They have security that's equivalent or even better than high security prisons. There's an armed constabulary. There's a huge amount, electric fences and all the rest of it. They are highly secure sites, but there's not very many of them, and they generate lots and lots of electricity. How do you scale that down to something that's a tenth of the size? But you'd still need to think about that level of security. Are you going to have armed guards at every chemical plant? In every factory, every glass factory, every steel, whatever. And, obviously there you've got the tankers of dangerous chemicals coming in all the time because that might be what their everyday business is all about. So how do you manage that security question? And it's actually difficult to blow up nuclear reactors. This is a hard thing to do, but it's not hard to blow up some of this other industrial stuff. And if somebody's thinking about blowing stuff up, they might fail to blow up the nuclear bit, but succeed in blowing up the rest of it to, devastating effect.
Trump's pretty good at blowing up nuclear sites in a different way. Well,
okay, but I'm not sure that bunker busting bombs are actually that widely available. But so I think that safety angle hasn't really been looked at in a way that it needs to be. And so I suspect that once these reactors are ready for market, the first thing they'll do is put them on places like Hartlepool. And then they'll start thinking, it'd be great to go and put them in XYZ locations. And then they'll be like, yeah, okay, but that's kind of a bit risky. How do we manage that? So really you need to be looking at a different type of small reactor where you could potentially bury it. And Westinghouse is looking at really small reactors. They're called micro reactors, about 5 megawatts. And these would be completely black box. So essentially the thing turns up on site, you plug it in, it runs for 8 years, fuel runs out, you take it away and plug a new one in.
Plug and play nuclear. Amazing.
So literally you don't have to do anything on site other than build a little concrete pad for it to sit on, that you could have that underground.
Okay.
You wouldn't be needing to worry about maintenance access.
There's no risk of meltdown with something so small.
Well, there's obviously always a risk of meltdown.
Right.
But you design that into the thing. But if it's buried underground, then obviously where's the radiation going to go?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not an expert.
Well, it'll stay underground. So it actually has some really big safety benefits, but also it's going to be extremely difficult to access to do anything to it. And most of the meltdowns that we've seen historically have been because of a user error. Like Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island was user error, and Fukushima didn't melt down. So it's you wouldn't have user error because it's literally a black box. You plug it in, leave it, and come back.
Go nuclear. Okay, amazing. Well, is there anything I've not asked you about that we should have covered?
Well, you seemed interested about Heathrow.
Yes. Sorry, I actually wrote that down. Where did I put it? Yeah, Heathrow. As soon as you said, I was very critical. I wrote that down. Yeah, tell me.
So Heathrow, in the aftermath, said, "Oh, this was unprecedented."
Well, do you want to explain actually what happens if anyone didn't know?
Oh, okay. So, late at night, a transformer at the substation that powered Heathrow caught fire, and then one next to it then suffered heat damage, and they had to switch off the whole of the substation while they tackled the fire. Transformers are full of flammable oil, so it takes quite a long time to bring those fires under control. So these are 2 of the 3 transformers at the substation.
Mm-hmm.
The one in the middle caught fire. The one to the right of it suffered heat damage. There's another one a bit further away to the left here. That was far enough away that it wasn't damaged. But it couldn't be used while this fire was ongoing because they had to de-energize the substation so that it was safe for the firefighters to try and tackle the fire. So Heathrow actually can get electricity from 3 big high voltage substations. But because they considered the risk of losing their supply through North Hyde, that's North Hyde substation, to be extremely low, despite it having a pretty high impact, they didn't really think they needed to do very much about it. So they had a plan that if that were to happen, they would have to switch to the other grid supply points. But given the way their internal network is configured, that would take between 10 and 12 hours to achieve. And they just thought this was appropriate. Now, after the fire happened, their chief executive was on the news and he's like, "This was an unprecedented incident. This isn't our fault. We can't be blamed for any of this." Except it wasn't true. It wasn't unprecedented. In 2017, a substation at Atlanta Airport in the US caught fire. The airport lost power for about half a day, cost tens of millions of dollars. And then airports across the US went, okay, we need to think about this. And so you've got probably a dozen airports with quite substantial gas-fired power stations on site. JFK's got a 110 megawatt gas power station. And then you've got lots of other airports that put in auto switching between different grid supply points. And so, auto switching, it might not cut over immediately, but you can, within minutes, and you'd have some batteries or whatever that would bridge that. So it's not unprecedented, and you can do stuff about it. So what should Heathrow do? Heathrow should put in, so their site loads about 50 to 60 megawatts. They should put in 100, 110 megawatt gas generator and get rid of this biomass thing. How they're allowed to burn wood in West London, I don't know. But 100, 110 megawatt gas generator, that will do 2 things. One is it gives them room for growth, for expansion. And 2, they can sell that surplus electricity to the grid. I think JFK does that in New York. That area of the grid's very congested, so that'll be good money for them. They can get a turbine that can dual fuel on Jet Kero. They have a pipeline to the Forley refinery, Jet Kero pipeline. So if they have any issue with their gas supplies through the gas grid, they can then switch to the Kero and keep running. So this will be high levels of resilience.
Surely
super
they
high
are
levels of
doing this now,
resilience.
though.
No, because it's not going to fit with their net zero sustainability plan. They'd rather burn wood. So I would be willing to bet money they won't do this. but they should do it. Methane is actually really clean to burn, far cleaner than wood. Most of the electricity they get comes from burning gas anyway, so whether it's burned on their site or somewhere else, it really shouldn't matter to them. The whole place is full of generating turbines that are actually running on oil, which is dirtier than gas, so kerosene, talking about jet engines here. So this would be an environmentally acceptable solution. It's not net zero, but it's good, right? It's much better than burning either oil or wood, and you can have the oil as a fallback. You need to retain your diesel generators for emergency equipment because your gas plant could fail. And there's actually no evidence that their diesel backup failed in March. What that does is it basically provides power to the control tower, runway lights, and the instrument landing systems.
The essentials.
Yeah, because, Heathrow is an extremely busy airport. The timing of the incident was actually in quiet time. But, you can have planes landing every 1 to 2 minutes. If suddenly you lost all power to the control tower, the ILS went off and, there were no runway lights, this would be an extremely dangerous situation. And for planes on the final approach, it would be quite a frightening thing to have to do a go-around when you don't have tower comms. And it would put a really huge burden on the National Control Centre because they'd suddenly have to reclaim all of these flights that they'd handed off to the Heathrow Tower. And they'd have to do it really quickly.
Gosh.
And so that's why you have these backup systems. And it's why they probably won't ever get away from diesel, because really the amount of time you need to use them is small, right? This is not something you expect to happen very often. Yes, you need to run them a bit to test them and so on. But, the consequences of not having those critical safety systems would be catastrophic. So you just can't take that risk. And you should be willing to burn all the diesel in the world, basically, to prevent that kind of catastrophe.
Please. Yeah. I don't want that landing at Heathrow at all.
No.
Feels like Die Hard 2.
Well, yeah, lots of people said that. But you've got some things that are low probability of happening, but really high consequence. Just like home insurance.
Yeah.
Right. You don't want your house to burn down, but if it does, you really want to have the insurance.
Yeah.
And so having the diesel generators, you might not want to use them, but so much better to have them than not.
Home insurance for airports. Kathryn, it's been fascinating. Thank you so much. What logic?
Yes.
Help you where to go, I think.
So what, as in unit of power, WATT-logic.com is my website. I have a blog, which essentially I use that as my shop window. So if I blogged about it, then I'm happy to work on topics relating to it.
Do you also have a column?
Except maybe hydrogen, because I don't really agree with hydrogen.
Do you have a column as well?
I do, yes. Yeah. Column in the Telegraph. Mm-hmm. So that's quite fun to write. Bit of a side hustle.
And if you're listening, Ed Miliband, you should probably give Kathryn a call and get her in. Build some nuclear plants. But no, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
And giving us so much of your time. I feel like I understand a lot more now. Net zero is a scam. Let's get rid of net zero. But thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for listening. We'll see you all soon. Thank you.